He bought an entire island for just $1, thinking it was worthless land no one else wanted. But when he and his young son discovered the hidden cave behind the waterfall, what they found inside would be worth $400 million and change their lives forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to smash that subscribe button because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The fluorescent lights of the hospital cafeteria buzzed overhead as Daniel Cooper sat alone at a corner table, his coffee gone cold an hour ago. It was 3 in the morning, and he'd just finished a double shift as a night custodian. His shoulders ached, his hands were raw from industrial cleaners, but none of that compared to the exhaustion that lived deeper, in his chest, where grief had made a permanent home. 2 years had passed since Sarah died. 2 years since cancer had stolen his wife, his best friend, the only person who'd ever made him believe life could be more than just getting by. She'd been 31. Daniel was 34 now, though some days he felt ancient. Their son Marcus was 8 years old and asked about his mother every single night before bed. "Dad, do you think Mom can see us?" Daniel never had a good answer. He'd pull Marcus close, kiss his forehead, and say something like, "I think she's always watching, buddy." Always. But sitting in that empty cafeteria with another shift ahead of him in 6 hours, Daniel wasn't sure he believed his own words anymore. The truth was simpler and harder. Sarah was gone, and he was drowning in a life that felt too heavy to carry alone. The apartment they rented was cramped, a 1-bedroom where Marcus slept on the pull-out couch and Daniel collapsed on a mattress in the corner each morning after work. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The neighbor upstairs played music until 4 in the morning. The heating barely worked in winter, but it was what they could afford, and afford was a generous word. Between the medical bills that still arrived like clockwork, the credit card debt that had ballooned during Sarah's treatment, and the cost of just surviving, Daniel was always behind, always scrambling, always one emergency away from losing everything. He worked 60 hours a week, mopping hospital floors and emptying trash cans. Sometimes he'd pass Sarah's old room, the oncology wing where she'd spent her final months, and he'd have to stop, grip his cart, and breathe through the pain that rose up like a wave trying to pull him under. His supervisor had offered him counseling. The hospital had grief support groups. But Daniel didn't have time for grief. He had bills to pay and a son to raise and floors that needed mopping whether his heart was broken or not. Tonight the cafeteria was particularly quiet. Just him and a nurse at the far end scrolling through her phone, probably counting down the minutes until her shift ended like everyone else who worked through the darkest hours. Daniel pulled out his own phone, not to check messages because no one messaged him anymore, but because the silence was too heavy. He scrolled mindlessly through news, through social media posts of people living lives that looked nothing like his. Smiling families on vacation, friends at restaurants, normal people doing normal things. Then he saw it. An ad, barely noticeable between posts about recipes and vacation photos. Government auction, private island. Starting bid, $1, no reserve. Daniel blinked. He clicked. The listing was sparse, the kind of posting that felt half-hearted, like whoever wrote it didn't expect anyone to care. 12-acre island off the coast of northern Maine, previously owned by private estate. Property sold as is. No utilities, no structures guaranteed. Buyer responsible for all costs. Auction ends midnight Eastern Standard Time. There were 3 photos, distant shots of a tree-covered island surrounded by gray water, a crumbling stone foundation barely visible through overgrown vegetation, and what looked like an old dock tilting into the ocean like a drunk leaning against a lamppost. Daniel stared at the screen. $1. It had to be a scam, or a trap, or a joke someone was playing on desperate people scrolling through their phones at 3 in the morning. But something about it hooked him. Maybe it was the exhaustion talking. Maybe it was the way his entire life felt like a trap anyway. So what was one more? Maybe it was simply that for the first time in 2 years, something had surprised him, made him feel something other than tired. He looked at the timer. 11 minutes until the auction closed. Current bid, $1. No other bidders. His thumb hovered over the button. Place. Bid, $1. He thought about Marcus asleep at his mother-in-law's house because Daniel couldn't afford a babysitter for overnight shifts. He thought about their cramped apartment with the leaking ceiling and the bills stacked on the counter like accusations. He thought about Sarah, who used to talk about running away to an island someday, just the three of them, where life could be simple and quiet and theirs. She'd said it laughing, usually after a particularly hard day, usually while they were eating instant ramen because that's all they could afford. Someday she'd say, "We're going to disappear to an island where nobody can find us, where Marcus can run wild and we can just breathe." Daniel would smile and say, "Sure, as soon as we win the lottery." And she'd laugh and kiss him and say, "Who needs a lottery when we have each other?" But they didn't have each other anymore. He didn't have her, and the lottery had never come. His thumb pressed down. Bid placed. You are the current highest bidder. Daniel sat back, heart pounding for no reason he could name. He watched the seconds tick down. 10 minutes. 5, 2, 1. Congratulations. You have won this auction. Payment details will be sent to your email. Daniel stared at the screen. Then he started laughing, soft at first, then louder, until tears rolled down his face and he wasn't sure if he was laughing or crying or both. The nurse looked over at him with concern, but he waved her off, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He'd just bought an island for $1. An actual island. 12 acres of land somewhere off the coast of Maine that nobody else wanted. And he had absolutely no idea why he'd done it or what it meant or what he was supposed to do now. But for the first time in 2 years, he felt something other than numb. He felt reckless, maybe even a little bit alive. The payment went through on his credit card the next day, $1 plus a $17 processing fee. Daniel looked at the confirmation email at least 20 times, half expecting it to disappear or reveal itself as spam. But it was real. He now legally owned an island. The email included GPS coordinates, a basic property description, and a waiver he had to sign acknowledging that the state made no guarantees about the condition or safety of the property. Daniel signed it without reading the fine print. What was the worst that could happen? He'd already lost everything that mattered. For 3 weeks he didn't tell anyone. Not his mother-in-law, Linda, who already thought he worked too much and worried too little about Marcus's emotional well-being. Not his co-worker, Pete, who'd invited him to a beer twice and Daniel had declined both times because he was too tired and too broke. Not even Marcus, because how do you tell an 8-year-old that you bought an island for $1 without sounding completely insane? But the island sat in his mind like a seed, growing, taking root. He found himself looking up the coordinates on his phone during breaks, studying satellite images of the tree-covered land surrounded by cold Atlantic water. He read forums about Maine islands, about property laws, about what it meant to own land you couldn't easily reach. Most of what he found was discouraging. Islands were expensive to maintain. You needed a boat. Utilities were impossible. Property taxes, even on worthless land, could add up. Several people in the forum said that buying a remote island was a fool's errand, a money pit, a disaster waiting to happen. But Daniel had already made the purchase. And something about it, maybe the recklessness of it, maybe the way it felt like a tiny rebellion against a life that had beaten him down, kept pulling him back. He started making plans. He had 2 days off coming up. He could rent a boat. Take Marcus. Just go see it. Just look. What harm could it do? On a Thursday evening, after picking Marcus up from Linda's house, Daniel finally told him. They were sitting at their tiny kitchen table eating spaghetti with jarred sauce when Daniel said, "How would you feel about going on an adventure this weekend?" Marcus looked up, eyes brightening the way they rarely did anymore. An adventure where? To an island, Daniel said. An island I bought. Marcus blinked. You bought an island? His voice was skeptical in the way that only children who've learned to doubt promises can be. For how much? Daniel smiled. $1. Now Marcus laughed. No way. Yes way, Daniel said. And I thought maybe we could go see it together. Just you and me. Marcus studied his father's face, looking for the lie, the joke, the disappointment that usually followed when something sounded too good. But Daniel held his gaze, steady and serious. Are there pirates? Marcus asked. Probably not, Daniel admitted. Treasure? Maybe, Daniel said, though he didn't believe it. Marcus thought about this for a long moment. Then he said, Can we bring sandwiches? Absolutely, Daniel said. And just like that, they had a plan. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of coastal Maine morning that felt like winter even in late spring. Daniel packed a backpack with sandwiches, water bottles, flashlights, a first aid kit, and a rope he'd bought at the hardware store for reasons he couldn't entirely explain. Marcus wore his favorite red jacket and sneakers that were too small, but Daniel couldn't afford to replace yet. They drove 2 hours north to a small fishing town Daniel had found online, a place so small it barely had a name, just a harbor with 3 docks and a bait shop that doubled as a post office. Daniel had arranged to hire a boat captain named Hank, a weathered man in his 60s who looked like he'd been born on the water and would probably die there too. Hank met them at the dock, hands in his pockets, squinting at Daniel with the kind of suspicion small-town people reserved for outsiders. You the one who called about the island? Hank asked. That's me, Daniel said. This is my son, Marcus. Hank nodded at Marcus, his expression softening slightly. You know there ain't nothing out there, right? No power, no buildings standing, nothing but trees and rocks. I know, Daniel said. We just want to see it. Hank shrugged. Your money. The boat was small but sturdy, the kind of working vessel that had seen decades of lobster traps and early mornings. Hank guided them out of the harbor, engine coughing to life, and they headed into open water. The ocean was choppy, waves slapping against the hull. Marcus gripped the side of the boat, eyes wide, half scared and half thrilled. Daniel kept a hand on his shoulder, anchoring him. The mainland receded behind them until it was just a dark line on the horizon. Ahead, through the morning mist, an island began to take shape. It was bigger than Daniel had imagined. Tall pines and thick undergrowth covered most of it, but through the trees he could see the remnants of structures, stone walls weathered by decades of salt air and neglect. The shoreline was rocky, inhospitable, the kind of place that made you understand why nobody had wanted it. But there was something else, too, something Daniel couldn't quite name. A feeling of possibility, maybe, or just the strange thrill of standing at the edge of something unknown. Hank circled the island once before approaching, pointing out the safest place to land. The old docks collapsed, he said. Best bet is that rocky beach there. He anchored offshore and helped Daniel and Marcus wade through shallow water to the beach. Water soaked Daniel's jeans to the knees, cold and sharp. Marcus laughed as a wave splashed higher than expected. I'll be back in 3 hours, Hank called over the engine. Radio if you need me sooner. Daniel patted the two-way radio in his jacket pocket. Got it. Thanks. The boat pulled away, and suddenly it was just the two of them, father and son, standing on an island they'd bought for $1, surrounded by the sound of wind and waves and possibilities. Marcus took off running immediately, splashing through tide pools, laughing in a way Daniel hadn't heard in months. Dad, look at this, there's a path. Daniel followed, boots crunching over broken shells and dried seaweed. There was a path, faint but visible, winding up from the beach into the trees. Someone had walked this way many times years ago, wearing it into the earth. They walked in silence, Marcus darting ahead, Daniel keeping him in sight. The air smelled like salt and pine and something older, earthier. Somewhere above them, gulls cried. The path led upward through dense forest, branches reaching across like arms. Sunlight filtered through in patches, turning the forest floor into a patchwork of light and shadow. After 10 minutes of climbing, they emerged into a clearing. Before them stood what remained of a house, or maybe it had been a lodge. Stone walls rose 3 feet high, open to the sky. Vines had reclaimed everything, growing through windows that no longer existed, wrapping around what might have once been door frames. Marcus approached cautiously, touching the stone walls with reverence. "Someone lived here," he whispered. "A long time ago," Daniel agreed. He stepped over the threshold into what might have been a living room. An old cast-iron stove sat in the corner, rusted and tilted but still recognizable. Broken pottery littered the floor. A metal bed frame leaned against one wall, springs visible through rotted fabric. Whoever lived here had left in a hurry, or maybe they died here and nature had simply reclaimed what was hers. They explored for an hour. Marcus found an old glass bottle, blue and thick, probably worth something to collectors. Daniel found a metal toolbox so corroded it crumbled when he touched it, screws and nails spilling onto the ground like ancient tears. They walked the perimeter of the island, finding nothing but trees, rocks, and the endless sound of waves. The place was beautiful in a wild, untouched way, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that there was more here than just abandoned ruins and overgrown paths. Then Marcus stopped suddenly. "Dad," he said, "do you hear that?" Daniel listened. At first, nothing, just wind and waves and the creaking of trees. But then he heard it too. Water. Not ocean waves, but something else. Running water, flowing, musical. They pushed through a thick stand of trees, branches scratching at their jackets, and stumbled into a clearing neither of them had expected. Before them, a small waterfall cascaded down a rocky cliff face, maybe 20 feet high. The water pooled at the bottom in a clear basin before trickling away toward the ocean through a carved channel in the stone. "Whoa," Marcus breathed. Daniel stepped closer, transfixed. The waterfall was beautiful, untouched, the kind of natural feature Sarah would have painted if she'd ever seen it. She'd been an artist, back before the hospital bills had buried them, before cancer had stolen her energy and her dreams. She used to sketch coastlines and dream about places like this, places where water and stone met in perfect, accidental beauty. "Can we go behind it?" Marcus asked. Daniel frowned. "Behind what?" "The waterfall," Marcus said, like it was obvious. "In movies, there's always something behind waterfalls." Daniel smiled despite himself. "Buddy, that's just movies." But Marcus was already moving, climbing carefully over wet rocks toward the falls. "Marcus, be careful!" Daniel's heart jumped into his throat as he scrambled after him, but Marcus was fearless, the way only kids who hadn't learned real fear yet could be. He navigated the slippery rocks with the confidence of youth, then disappeared behind the curtain of water. "Dad!" his voice echoed. "There's a cave!" Daniel's stomach dropped. He pushed through the cold spray, water soaking his jacket, shocking against his skin, and found himself in a narrow opening behind the falls. Marcus stood just inside, illuminated by the filtered light coming through the water. The space around him was bigger than Daniel had expected. "See?" Marcus grinned. "I told you." Daniel's eyes adjusted. It wasn't just a shallow depression. It was a real cave going deep into the rock, the ceiling rising higher the further back it went. "Okay, buddy, let's head back," Daniel said. "We don't have lights, and we don't know how safe it is." "There's something in here," Marcus said, pointing deeper into the darkness. Daniel froze. Deep in the cave, barely visible in the dim light, were shapes. Square shapes. Too regular to be natural. Too intentional to be accidental. "Stay here," Daniel said, his voice suddenly serious. But Marcus followed anyway, because 8-year-olds don't follow instructions when adventure calls. They moved deeper, pulling out their phones, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The temperature dropped. The sound of the waterfall faded to a distant murmur. And then Daniel saw them clearly. Crates. Dozens of wooden crates stacked carefully against the walls. Some were marked with faded stamps in languages Daniel didn't recognize. Others had rope handles that had rotted away, leaving just the impression of where they'd been. All of them were sealed with heavy wax, dark and cracked with age. "What is this?" Marcus whispered. Daniel's heart was pounding now. He approached the nearest crate slowly, cautiously, like it might disappear if he moved too fast. He crouched down and ran his fingers over the wood. It was old but not ancient, preserved by the dry cave air and consistent temperature. The kind of preservation that was almost unnatural. There was a crowbar lying nearby, propped against the cave wall like someone had left it on purpose. Like someone had known that one day someone would come and need it. "Should we open one?" Marcus asked, his voice barely containing his excitement. Daniel hesitated. This was someone's property once. This was hidden for a reason, but he'd bought the island. Legally, whatever was here belonged to him now. Didn't it? "Just one," Daniel said, surprising himself. He wedged the crowbar under the lid of the nearest crate and pried. The wood groaned in protest. Nails that had held for decades shrieked as they pulled free. The lid came away with a crack that echoed through the cave like a gunshot. Marcus leaned in, breathless. Daniel pulled the lid aside completely and looked inside. Wrapped in oilcloth, yellowed with age but intact, was something hard and rectangular. Daniel's hands were shaking now, though he couldn't say why. He peeled back the cloth carefully, gently, like unwrapping something sacred. And then he saw it. A painting. A real painting, old and framed in gold leaf that caught their phone lights and gleamed. The image showed a woman in a garden, impressionist style, soft colors bleeding into each other like a dream captured in oils. Flowers surrounded her, roses maybe, or peonies. The brushstrokes were visible, thick and deliberate, the way only original paintings had texture. Daniel didn't know art. He'd never been to a museum. He couldn't tell a Monet from a poster bought at a mall. But he knew enough to recognize that this wasn't a print from a frame shop. This was real. This was old. And judging by the way it had been packed, the care taken to preserve it, this was valuable. Marcus reached for another crate. "Dad, let's open more!" Daniel's hands were still shaking, but he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Let's see what else is here." They opened 3 more crates. Each one held paintings, different styles, different sizes, different eras. Some looked European, scenes of countryside and nobility Daniel vaguely recognized from history books. Others looked older, religious iconography with gold leaf halos. One showed a stormy sea with ships being tossed by waves so realistic Daniel could almost hear the wind. All of them were carefully wrapped, meticulously preserved, hidden away like secrets too precious to expose to daylight. By the time Hank's boat horn sounded in the distance, signaling their pickup time, Daniel and Marcus stood in the cave surrounded by open crates, speechless. Daniel's phone light swept across the cave, counting. There were at least 60 more crates they hadn't opened, maybe more in the deeper shadows they couldn't see. "Dad," Marcus whispered, tugging on Daniel's wet jacket, "are we rich?" Daniel stared at the paintings, at the gold frames gleaming in the darkness, at the careful brushwork of artists whose names he didn't know but whose talent was undeniable. He thought about their apartment with the leaking ceiling, the medical bills, the credit card debt, the double shifts mopping hospital floors. "I don't know, buddy," Daniel said honestly. His voice came out rough, choked. "I really don't know." The boat horn sounded again, more insistent. They had to go. Hank wouldn't wait forever. Daniel carefully rewrapped the painting they'd first opened, placed it back in the crate, and positioned the lid loosely on top. Marcus helped him cover the other opened crates as best they could. "We can't tell anyone," Daniel said, looking his son in the eye. "Not yet. Not until we figure out what this is." Marcus nodded solemnly. "It's our secret." "It's our secret," Daniel confirmed. They made their way out of the cave, through the waterfall, back down the path to the beach where Hank was waiting, engine idling. "You find anything interesting?" Hank called as they waded out to the boat. "Just rocks and trees," Daniel lied, helping Marcus climb aboard. "Like you said." The ride back to the mainland was quiet. Marcus sat pressed against Daniel's side, both of them soaked and shivering. But Daniel barely felt the cold. His mind was racing, spinning through possibilities and questions and fears he couldn't name yet. What had they found? Who had hidden it? Why? And what was he supposed to do now? That night, long after Marcus had fallen asleep on the pull-out couch, Daniel sat at their tiny kitchen table with his laptop open. He'd taken photos, hundreds of photos. The cave, the crates, the paintings, zoomed in on details, on signatures he couldn't read, on brushwork that looked like it came from another century. He typed into the search bar, "How to identify valuable paintings." The results were overwhelming. Art fraud, authentication, provenance, museums, auction houses, legal implications, page after page of information that made his head spin and his stomach churn. He tried a different search. What to do if you find hidden treasure? The results were even worse. Finders keepers laws, property rights, stolen art databases, cultural heritage protection, stories of people who found valuable things and ended up in legal battles that destroyed their lives. Daniel closed the laptop and pressed his palms against his eyes. Maybe he should just close the cave back up, pretend they'd never seen it, take Marcus back to their normal life and forget any of this had happened. But even as he thought it, he knew he couldn't, because Sarah had died without ever seeing a real painting in a museum, without ever traveling to Europe like she'd dreamed, without ever experiencing the kind of beauty that art could offer. And now, somehow, impossibly, Daniel was sitting in a crumbling apartment with photos of paintings that might be worth more than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes. The universe had offered him something. He just wasn't sure yet if it was a gift or a curse. His phone buzzed. An email. Subject line, "Government auction follow-up." He opened it with trembling fingers. "Thank you for your purchase. Please note that all sales are final. The state makes no claims regarding the contents or condition of the property. Any discoveries made on the property are the legal responsibility of the new owner. Standard liability waivers apply." Daniel read it 3 times. Legal responsibility of the new owner. He looked at the photos on his laptop again. The paintings gleaming in the darkness. The cave that had kept them safe for decades. The secret that now belonged to him. Tomorrow he would have to decide. Keep quiet or reach out. Protect the secret or seek help. Trust that he'd stumbled onto something miraculous or prepare for everything to fall apart. But tonight, in the darkness of their cramped apartment with his son sleeping peacefully nearby, Daniel let himself feel something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Terrifying, overwhelming, impossible hope. He'd bought an island for $1 and found a cave full of paintings. And maybe, just maybe, his life was about to change. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay in his narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, watching shadows from passing cars sweep across the plaster. His mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment they'd opened that first crate, the way the gold frame had caught their flashlight beams, the weight of the painting in his hands. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cave, the stacked crates, the decades of secrets waiting in the darkness. By 4 a.m, he'd made a decision. He had to go back. He had to see everything, document everything, understand what he'd stumbled into before making any calls or telling anyone else. Because once other people knew, once the secret was out, he'd lose control of whatever happened next. And Daniel had lost control of too many things in his life already. He waited until Marcus woke up, made breakfast in silence, then sat his son down at the kitchen table. The light coming through their small window was gray and weak. "Buddy," Daniel said, "we need to go back to the island today." Marcus looked up from his cereal, eyes brightening. "Really? Today?" Daniel nodded. "But this time, we're going to be there longer. We need to really explore that cave. See what else is there." "Can we open all the boxes?" Marcus asked. "As many as we can," Daniel said. "But remember, this is still our secret. Nobody else can know yet." Marcus made a zipping motion across his lips. "Secret," he repeated solemnly. They were on Hank's boat by 9 in the morning. The captain gave Daniel a long look when he requested another trip so soon. "You sure you want to go back out there?" Hank asked. "Most people see that place once, and that's enough. We need to do some more exploring," Daniel said. "Maybe take some measurements, see if the property is worth developing." Hank shrugged. "Your funeral." The ride out was rougher today. The ocean had turned choppy overnight, waves slapping against the hull with force. Marcus gripped the side of the boat, no longer excited, just trying not to get sick. Daniel kept a steadying hand on his shoulder and watched the island materialize through the mist. They made it to shore, waded through the cold water, and Hank called after them, "I'll be back at 4. That gives you 7 hours." Daniel waved acknowledgement and turned toward the path. This time, they didn't explore the ruins or walk the perimeter. They went straight for the waterfall, moving through the forest with purpose. When they reached the clearing, Daniel paused. In daylight, the waterfall was even more beautiful than he remembered. Water cascaded down the rock face in sheets of silver, pooling in a basin so clear he could see stones at the bottom. Sarah would have loved this, he thought, and the grief hit him sudden and sharp, the way it still did sometimes when he wasn't prepared. "Dad?" Marcus tugged his hand. "Are we going in?" "Yeah, buddy," Daniel said, shaking off the feeling. "Let's go." They climbed over the wet rocks, pushed through the cold curtain of water, and entered the cave. Daniel had brought better equipment this time: 2 heavy-duty flashlights, a camping lantern, work gloves, and his phone fully charged. He set up the lantern in the center of the cave, and suddenly the space was transformed. The light revealed details they'd missed before. The cave wasn't just one chamber. It went deeper, branching off into smaller alcoves, and everywhere, stacked with military precision, were the crates. Daniel started at the nearest wall and began opening crates systematically, carefully. The first held 3 paintings, each wrapped individually. One showed a Venice canal scene, gondolas floating beneath stone bridges. Another depicted a woman reading by candlelight, her face illuminated in gold tones. The third was abstract, bold colors clashing and bleeding into each other in ways that made Daniel's eyes hurt, but somehow still felt intentional, meaningful. The second crate held sculptures, small bronze figures, their details so fine Daniel could see individual fingers, the folds of fabric, expressions frozen in metal. One was a dancer, caught mid-spin. Another showed a mother holding a child, their faces pressed together in a moment of perfect tenderness. Marcus helped unwrap each piece with reverent care, his small hands gentle despite his excitement. "This one's heavy," he'd say, struggling with a marble bust. Or, "Dad, look at the colors on this one." They opened crate after crate. Paintings dominated, but there were other treasures too. Illuminated manuscripts with gold leaf that still gleamed, pages filled with Latin text and intricate illustrations. Ancient pottery, Greek or Roman maybe, with black figures dancing around terracotta curves. Jewelry in velvet-lined boxes, rings with stones the size of Marcus's thumbnail, necklaces that caught the light and threw rainbow fragments across the cave walls. By noon they'd opened 20 crates, and Daniel had photographed everything, taking shots from multiple angles, zooming in on signatures when he could find them, on details that might help identify the pieces later. Some paintings had small brass plates attached to the frames with names and dates, though many were in languages Daniel didn't recognize. Italian, French, German maybe. One plate read simply, Caravaggio, 1604. Daniel's hands had trembled when he photographed that one. They took a break, sitting on the stone floor of the cave, eating the sandwiches Daniel had packed. Marcus swung his legs, kicking at nothing, staring at the opened crates surrounding them. "Dad," he said through a mouthful of peanut butter and jelly, "why did someone hide all this?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Daniel admitted. "It doesn't make sense," Marcus continued. "If you have pretty things, you should show people. You should put them where everyone can see." Daniel smiled sadly. "You're right, buddy. You should. So why didn't they?" Daniel looked around at the fortune surrounding them, millions of dollars worth of art and history stacked in a damp cave behind a waterfall. "I don't know yet." But then he saw it. In the far corner of the cave, partially hidden behind a stack of crates, was a desk. A real desk, heavy oak, somehow still solid after decades in the cave's stable environment. Daniel stood and walked toward it, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The desk had 3 drawers, all closed. Dust covered everything, thick and undisturbed. Daniel tried the top drawer, stuck. He tried again, pulling harder, and it gave with a shriek of wood on wood. Inside were papers, yellowed and brittle, covered in handwriting. Bills of sale, receipts, letters written in cramped script. Daniel pulled out a handful and brought them into the lantern light. Marcus peered over his shoulder as Daniel read aloud. Invoice, Dubois Auction House, Paris, June 1971. 1 oil painting, Water Lilies series, artist Claude Monet. Purchase price, 17,000 francs. Daniel's breath caught. Monet. He'd heard that name. Everyone had heard that name. He set that paper aside and grabbed another. Receipt, private sale, Florence, April 1973. 1 oil on canvas, religious scene, artist attributed, Caravaggio. Price, $42,000. Daniel's hands started shaking again. These weren't just paintings. These were the paintings, the real ones, the famous ones. He opened the second drawer. More papers, more receipts, more documentation spanning decades. But at the bottom, wrapped in canvas that was somehow waterproof, were books. 6 of them, leather-bound, hand-sized. Daniel pulled out the first one and opened it carefully. A journal. The handwriting inside matched the handwriting on the loose papers. Property of Theodore Millbrook, the inside cover read. Private collection log, 1969 through 1984. Daniel's heart was pounding now. He flipped through the pages. Each entry was meticulous. Dates, locations, descriptions of pieces acquired, prices paid, observations about condition and authenticity. But it was more than just a ledger. It was a confession. Theodore Millbrook had written his thoughts, his fears, his justifications for what he was doing. Daniel sat down on the cave floor, Marcus settling beside him, and began reading the earliest entries. January 4th, 1969. Purchased my first real piece today, a small Renoir sketch from an estate sale in Connecticut. The family had no idea what they had. I paid $300 for something worth at least $50,000. I know I should feel guilty. I don't. I feel alive. March 22nd, 1970. Attended an underground auction in Brussels. The pieces there were magnificent, and no one was asking questions about provenance. I acquired 2 paintings and a sculpture for a fraction of their value. This is becoming an obsession. I tell myself I'm preserving art, protecting it from being lost or destroyed. But truthfully, I just want to own beauty. I want to possess what others can't. Daniel flipped ahead, reading entries at random. August 1973. Traveled to Argentina following a lead about a private collector selling off his holdings before the political situation deteriorates. Found a Vermeer that was supposed to have been destroyed in the war. It wasn't destroyed. It was hidden. And now it's mine. November 1975. I've stopped attending public auctions. Too many questions. Too much scrutiny. I work only through private channels now, dealers who don't care where pieces come from as long as the money is good. My collection has grown beyond my wildest dreams. I own works by masters most people only see in museums. But I can't show anyone, can't tell anyone. The moment I reveal what I have, it all disappears. January 1978. I bought the island today. 12 acres off the coast of Maine. Remote. Inaccessible. Perfect. I'm going to build a vault, not for me but for the collection, because I'm getting older and I'm getting scared. Scared of being caught, scared of losing everything, scared of dying and having all of this beauty scattered to the winds. The entries continued, but they changed in tone. Less excitement, more paranoia. Theodore wrote about moving the collection piece by piece to the island, about building the cave storage himself, about the physical toll it took. He wrote about sleepless nights wondering if he'd made a mistake. He wrote about the loneliness of owning treasures you could never share. The final journal covered the years 2000 through 2003. The handwriting had deteriorated, shakier, harder to read. June 2002. I'm dying. The doctors confirmed it today. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months if I'm lucky. I've spent 40 years building this collection, and I have no one to leave it to. No wife, no children, no friends who would understand. I could donate it anonymously, but then I'd have to explain where it came from, and I can't. Half of these pieces were acquired through questionable means. Some were definitely stolen. I'd be remembered as a thief, not a collector. March 17, 2003. This is my last entry. I'm too weak to write much longer. I've made my decision. The collection stays hidden. I've arranged for the island to revert to the state when I die. With any luck, no one will ever find what I've left behind. But if someone does, if somehow, years from now, someone stumbles onto this cave, I want them to know why I did this. I didn't steal to get rich. I stole because I loved beauty more than I loved being good. I spent my life accumulating masterpieces I could never show anyone, and in the end, what was the point? I die alone. The art dies with me. But maybe that's fitting. Maybe beauty was never meant to belong to anyone. Theodore Millbrook, March 2003. Daniel closed the journal and sat in silence. Marcus leaned against him. "Is that the person who hid everything?" Marcus asked quietly. "Yeah, buddy," Daniel said, his voice rough. "That's him." Was he bad? Daniel thought about that. Theodore Millbrook had spent 40 years acquiring art through questionable means, skirting laws, buying from questionable dealers. He'd hidden a collection worth hundreds of millions and taken the secret to his grave, but he'd also preserved beauty, kept it safe, protected it from being lost or destroyed. "I don't know if he was bad," Daniel said honestly. "I think he was complicated." They sat together for a long moment, surrounded by Theodore's legacy. Then Daniel picked up his phone and started calculating. If even a fraction of what Theodore claimed in his journals was true, if even some of these pieces were authentic, they were sitting in a cave with a collection worth more than Daniel could comprehend. The water lilies Monet alone could be worth tens of millions. The Caravaggio, if real, could be worth 50 million or more. The Vermeer, priceless. There were 68 crates. They'd only opened 27. And already Daniel had photographed pieces that, according to Theodore's meticulous notes, were worth over $200 million. His phone buzzed. A reminder. His shift at the hospital started in 6 hours. He had to mop floors tonight, empty trash cans, scrub toilets. He almost laughed at the absurdity. He was sitting on a fortune that could change everything, solve every problem, erase every debt, and in 6 hours he'd be back to mopping floors. The thought hit him with force. He didn't have to go back. He could sell one painting, just one. Even a minor piece could bring in enough money to quit his job, move Marcus to a better place, Breathe for the first time in years. But then what? How do you sell a painting that might be stolen? How do you explain where it came from? And what about the rest of the collection? What about Theodore's fear that the moment anyone found out, it would all be seized, scattered, destroyed? "Dad?" Marcus's voice pulled him back. "Are you okay?" Daniel realized he'd been staring at nothing, lost in thought. "Yeah, buddy, I'm okay." "What are we going to do with all this?" Marcus asked. "That's the question, isn't it?" Daniel said. He looked at his son, 8 years old, innocent, trusting, excited about treasure in the way only a child could be. Marcus didn't understand the weight of what they'd found, didn't understand that this discovery could save them or destroy them, that it came with impossible choices and consequences neither of them could predict. Daniel thought about Sarah, about the countless times she'd stood in the bookstore's art section, flipping through books about museums she'd never visit, paintings she'd never see in person. "We should go to Paris someday," she'd say. "See the Louvre. I want to stand in front of a real Monet and just look at it for as long as I want." Daniel would smile and say, "Someday we will." But someday never came. The cancer came first, and then the bills, and then the cremation costs and the grief that made it hard to breathe, let alone plan trips to Paris. Now Daniel was sitting in front of real Monets, real Caravaggios, real pieces of history that Sarah had dreamed about, and she wasn't here to see them. The injustice of it made his chest ache. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked. "Your mom," Daniel admitted. "She loved art. She always wanted to see these kinds of paintings." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think she knows about this place?" "I hope so," Daniel said, pulling his son close. "I really hope so. What happens next will turn this discovery upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power." Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more incredible true stories. They spent another hour documenting everything, taking detailed photographs, careful notes matching journal entries to specific pieces. Daniel photographed every page of Theodore's journals, preserving the record of how each item was acquired. When 4 o'clock approached, they carefully rewrapped the paintings they'd opened, returned them to their crates, and repositioned the lids. Daniel took one last look around the cave before they left, committing it to memory. Then they climbed back through the waterfall, made their way to the beach, and waited for Hank. The boat ride back was quiet. Daniel's mind was spinning, planning, worrying, hoping, fearing. That night, after putting Marcus to bed, Daniel sat at his laptop and started researching in earnest. He typed names from Theodore's journals into search engines. Claude Monet, Water Lilies series, stolen. The results made his stomach drop. Several Monet paintings from that series had been reported stolen over the years, some recovered, some still missing. He tried another. Vermeer, missing paintings. The results were overwhelming. Multiple Vermeer works had disappeared during World War II, vanished from private collections, or been stolen in famous heists. Some had been recovered, many hadn't. Daniel clicked through page after page of stolen art databases. The FBI maintained a list. Interpol had records. Museums posted images of missing pieces. And as he scrolled, he started recognizing paintings. The Venice Canal scene he'd photographed today. It matched a painting reported stolen from an Italian collector in 1976. The bronze dancer sculpture, part of a series taken from a French museum in 1981, piece after piece, match after match. Theodore hadn't exaggerated. He'd spent 40 years acquiring art through questionable channels, and much of it was stolen property. The realization hit Daniel with force. He couldn't just walk into a museum and say, "Hey, I found some missing masterpieces. Want to buy them?" The moment he revealed what he had, authorities would get involved. There would be investigations, ownership disputes, legal battles. And Daniel, the guy who'd bought an island for $1, would be at the center of it all. He could lose everything. Worse, he could be accused of theft himself, of knowingly possessing stolen property. His head was spinning, his hands were shaking. He closed the laptop and pressed his palms against his eyes. Maybe he should just close the cave back up, walk away, pretend they'd never seen it. But even as he thought it, he knew he couldn't, because those paintings didn't belong hidden in a cave. They belonged in museums where people could see them, appreciate them, learn from them. Sarah had died without ever seeing a real Monet. How many other people lived and died without experiencing the beauty that was locked away on his island? The moral weight of it pressed down on him like a physical thing. He could keep the secret and deprive the world of art that belonged in public view. Or he could reveal it and risk losing everything, including his freedom. He thought about Marcus, 8 years old and trusting his father to make the right choice. What kind of man did Daniel want his son to see? Someone who hid treasures for personal gain? Or someone who did the right thing even when it was hard? Daniel made a decision then, sitting alone in his cramped apartment at 2 in the morning. He was going to get help, professional help. Someone who understood art, authentication, and the legal complexities of found treasures. He opened his laptop again and started searching. Art authentication experts, art recovery specialists, museums with restitution programs, page after page of options, most of which looked expensive or intimidating or both. Then he found a name that appeared repeatedly, Dr. Evelyn Hartwell. She was an art historian based in Boston specializing in authentication and recovery. Her website showed credentials from Harvard, work with the FBI's art crime team, consulting for major museums. She'd been involved in recovering pieces from famous heists, authenticating works for auction houses, advising on restitution cases. If anyone could help him navigate this, it was her. Daniel composed an email, typing and deleting and retyping a dozen times. Subject: urgent inquiry regarding potential discovery. Dear Dr. Hartwell, I recently acquired property in Maine and discovered what appears to be a significant collection of artwork and artifacts hidden on the premises. I have reason to believe some pieces may be of considerable historical value, possibly including works by major artists. I need guidance on authentication, legal considerations, and appropriate next steps. I understand this is unusual, but I would greatly appreciate a confidential consultation. Respectfully, Daniel Cooper. He attached 3 photographs. The Monet, carefully cropped to show only the painting, 1 page from Theodore's journal, and a distant shot of the cave's interior showing the stacked crates. Then, before he could second-guess himself, he hit send. The email whooshed away into the digital void. Daniel sat back and exhaled slowly. There. He'd done it. He'd reached out. He'd asked for help. Now all he could do was wait and hope he hadn't just made the biggest mistake of his life. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Daniel lay awake imagining scenarios. Best case, Dr. Hartwell would help him authenticate everything, work with authorities to return stolen pieces, and somehow Daniel would end up with enough money to give Marcus a real future. Worst case, the FBI would raid his apartment, seize everything, accuse him of trafficking in stolen art, and he'd lose his son while fighting criminal charges from a jail cell. By morning he was exhausted and terrified, and still had no idea if he'd made the right choice. He made breakfast for Marcus, got him ready for school, and went through the motions of normal life while his phone sat on the counter, waiting for a response that might never come. Then, at 10:37 a.m., while Daniel was trying to sleep before his evening shift, his phone buzzed. An email from Dr. Evelyn Hartwell. Mr. Cooper, I've reviewed the photographs you sent. If these images are genuine and unaltered, we need to speak immediately. What you may have found is significant beyond measure. Do not move anything. Do not show these images to anyone else. Do not discuss this discovery with anyone outside your immediate family. Please call me at the number below at your earliest convenience. This is extremely time-sensitive. Dr. Evelyn Hartwell. Daniel's hands trembled as he dialed. She answered on the second ring. This is Evelyn Hartwell. Hi, this is Daniel Cooper. I emailed you about... "Where did you acquire these items, Mr. Cooper?" Her voice was sharp, urgent, professional. "I bought an island at a government auction for $1. The previous owner died years ago. The property reverted to the state. I found everything hidden in a cave." Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "My God. How many pieces are we talking about?" "I've opened about 30 crates so far," Daniel said. "There are at least 70 total, maybe more." Dr. Hartwell exhaled sharply. "And you have documentation? Journals?" "Yes," Daniel said. "The previous owner kept detailed records. Sales receipts, acquisition notes, everything going back to the late 1960s. "Mr. Cooper," Dr. Hartwell said carefully, "based on what I can see in these photographs and what you're describing, you may have stumbled onto one of the most significant art discoveries in modern history. That Monet in your photo, if it's authentic, and preliminary examination suggests it might be, it's a piece that's been missing for over 50 years, worth conservatively $30 million, maybe more." Daniel felt dizzy. "That's just one painting," Dr. Hartwell continued. "If you have 70 crates of comparable items, authenticated and properly handled, you're looking at a collection worth hundreds of millions of dollars." Daniel sat down hard on his bed. Hundreds of millions. The words didn't feel real. "But Mr. Cooper," she continued, her voice turning grave, "you need to understand something critical. Art at this level doesn't just appear. Many of these pieces are likely stolen property. There will be claims from museums, private collectors, governments. The legal complications will be extraordinary. If word gets out before we handle this properly, you could face serious consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Daniel asked, though he already knew. "Criminal investigation if authorities believe you knew the items were stolen. Seizure of all materials without compensation. Lawsuits from multiple parties claiming ownership, and potentially danger." "Danger?" "People have killed for far less than what you've found," she said bluntly. "If the wrong individuals learn about this discovery, you and your family could be at risk." Daniel's blood ran cold. "I have a son. He's 8. "I know," she said, her voice softening slightly. "That's why we need to handle this correctly. I can help you, Mr. Cooper, but you need to trust me, follow my guidance exactly, and understand that the road ahead will not be simple." Daniel thought about Marcus sleeping peacefully in the next room, innocent and excited about treasure. He thought about Sarah, who died dreaming of seeing art she never got to experience. He thought about Theodore Millbrook, dying alone with his secrets. "Okay," Daniel said, "tell me what to do." "First," Dr. Hartwell said, "tell me everything. How you found the island, what you've discovered, who else knows. Leave nothing out." So Daniel told her. He started with the sleepless night in the hospital cafeteria, the auction listing for $1, the desperate bid. He told her about the waterfall, the cave, the crates. He described opening them with Marcus, finding the paintings and sculptures and journals. He read her excerpts from Theodore's confessions. He admitted he'd taken hundreds of photographs, but hadn't shown them to anyone except her. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mr. Cooper," Dr. Hartwell finally said, "you've done exactly the right thing by contacting me. You've also been extraordinarily careful, which likely saved you from making mistakes that would have been catastrophic. Here's what happens next." She outlined a plan. She would assemble a small, trusted team. A conservator, a photographer, a legal expert specializing in cultural property. They would travel to the island, document everything in situ, begin the authentication process, and establish a clear legal framework for handling the discovery. It would take time, probably months. There would be negotiations with museums, governments, and possibly law enforcement. But if handled correctly, Daniel would be protected, compensated fairly, and the art would be returned to where it belonged. "And if we don't do this," Daniel asked, "if I just walk away?" "Then one of the greatest art collections of the century remains hidden," Dr. Hartwell said, "and you lose the opportunity to do something meaningful." "You said your wife loved art?" Daniel's throat tightened. "Yeah, she did." "Then imagine her name on plaques in museums next to paintings she dreamed of seeing. Imagine funding programs that let kids experience beauty the way she never got to. Imagine using this discovery to honor her memory in ways that matter." Daniel closed his eyes. Sarah would want that. She'd want the art to be seen, shared, celebrated. She'd want it to mean something beyond money. "Okay," he said. "Let's do this right." Dr. Hartwell scheduled a visit to the island for the following week. In the meantime, she instructed Daniel to continue documenting, to keep the discovery completely confidential, and to avoid returning to the cave alone. "It's not just about security," she explained. "It's about establishing proper chain of custody. Everything we do from this point forward needs to be legally defensible." That week passed in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Daniel went to work, mopped floors, and tried to act normal while his mind spun with possibilities. Marcus asked about the island constantly. "When can we go back, Dad?" "Soon, buddy," Daniel would say. "Soon." He spent his nights studying the photographs, cross-referencing them with Theodore's journals, trying to understand the full scope of what they'd found. Some entries in the journals broke his heart. Theodore writing about acquiring a Renaissance bronze of Madonna and Child, saying, "I bought this because my mother loved Mary. She died when I was young, and I never got to give her anything beautiful. Now I have this, and I have no one to share it with." Other entries made Daniel angry. Theodore describing how he'd paid a fraction of an item's value to desperate sellers who didn't know what they had, bragging about his cleverness. But most entries were just sad. The chronicle of a man who'd spent his life accumulating beauty and died alone, unable to enjoy what he'd collected or share it with anyone who'd understand. Marcus seemed to sense his father's mood that week. He was quieter than usual, more observant. One night, as Daniel tucked him into bed, Marcus asked, "Dad, are we going to be different after this?" "Different how?" Daniel asked. "Like, will we forget about Mom? Will we become people she wouldn't recognize?" Daniel's eyes burned. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Marcus close. "No, buddy, we're not going to forget Mom. And we're not going to change who we are. This discovery, whatever comes from it, it's going to help us honor her memory. We're going to make sure the art she loved gets seen by people who'll appreciate it. We're going to help families like ours who are struggling. We're going to do good things. Promise?" Marcus asked, his voice small. "Promise," Daniel said. Marcus nodded against his chest. "Okay, because Mom would want us to do good things." "Yeah, buddy," Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. "She would." After Marcus fell asleep, Daniel walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Cars passed, people walked by. Normal life continued, unknowing. But for Daniel Cooper, nothing would ever be normal again. He'd bought an island for $1, found a cave full of stolen masterpieces, and now he was about to step into a world he didn't understand, trusting strangers to help him navigate choices that could save his family or destroy them. He thought about Theodore's final journal entry. Maybe beauty was never meant to belong to anyone. Maybe Theodore was right. Maybe art was meant to be free, shared, experienced by everyone. And if Daniel could help make that happen, if he could ensure these hidden treasures found their way back into the world, then maybe his stupid $1 bid had meant something after all. Maybe finding this cave wasn't just luck. Maybe it was a second chance, not just for the art, but for him, for Marcus, for the memory of a woman who'd died too young, who'd loved beauty she never got to see, whose name could now live on in ways she'd never imagined. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, Daniel stood at the edge of something vast and terrifying and possibly wonderful, and he was ready. Dr. Evelyn Hartwell arrived on a gray Thursday morning with a team of 3. Daniel met them at the same dock where Hank kept his boat, his stomach in knots, his hands shaking despite trying to appear calm. Evelyn was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing and an intensity that made Daniel feel like he was being constantly evaluated. She wore practical clothes, hiking boots, and a waterproof jacket, but carried herself with an academic authority that was unmistakable. The team she'd brought was equally serious. Patricia, a conservator in her 50s who barely spoke but whose hands moved with surgical precision. James, a photographer with equipment cases that probably cost more than Daniel's car. And Raymond, a security consultant who looked more like a bodyguard and carried himself like someone who'd seen real danger. "They don't look like art people," Daniel whispered to Evelyn as they loaded onto Hank's boat. "Raymond isn't," Evelyn replied quietly. "But given what you've found, we need someone watching our backs." That made Daniel's anxiety spike higher. The boat ride was tense. Nobody spoke much. Marcus sat pressed against Daniel's side, sensing the shift in mood, no longer excited, just uncertain. Hank guided them through choppy water, glancing back occasionally with curiosity he was too polite to voice. When they reached the island, Evelyn's team moved with practiced efficiency. They hauled equipment up the path Daniel and Marcus had first walked, setting up staging areas, unpacking cameras and lights and instruments Daniel didn't recognize. By the time they reached the waterfall, Daniel's heart was hammering. This was it, the moment when professionals would confirm whether his discovery was real or if he'd been fooling himself. They climbed through the waterfall and entered the cave. Evelyn stopped just inside, her flashlight sweeping across the stacked crates. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "My God, it's exactly as you described. Better, actually." Patricia moved to the nearest opened crate, the one containing the Monet. She pulled on white gloves, lifted the painting with reverent care, and examined it under a portable UV light. Her hands trembled slightly. "It's authentic," she breathed. "Late period, probably 1899 or 1900, the brushwork, the pigments, the canvas weave. This is real." James immediately began photographing from every angle while Patricia continued her examination. Evelyn opened Theodore's journals and started cross-referencing entries with the visible crates. Raymond positioned himself near the cave entrance, watching, alert. They worked for 6 hours straight. Crate after crate was opened, examined, photographed, documented. Patricia's assessments came rapid fire. Caravaggio, authentic, circa 1604. Vermeer, probable authentic, needs laboratory analysis. Rembrandt, sketch, genuine. Ancient Greek pottery, Attic period, museum quality. Illuminated manuscript, 14th century, extraordinary condition. Each confirmation hit Daniel like a physical blow. It was real, all of it. Theodore hadn't been exaggerating or delusional. He'd assembled one of the most significant private art collections in history and hidden it in a cave where it had sat untouched for 20 years. By late afternoon, Evelyn's preliminary assessment was staggering. "Based on what we've examined today," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "you're looking at a collection valued between $400 and $500 million. Possibly more once we complete full authentication." Daniel had to sit down. His legs simply gave out. Marcus, who'd been helping move equipment and asking quiet questions all day, looked at his father with concern. "Dad, are you okay?" "Yeah, buddy," Daniel managed. "Just a lot to take in." That night, back on the mainland, Evelyn's team checked into a small hotel 2 towns over from where Daniel lived. Evelyn asked him to join them for a debriefing. They sat in her room with coffee and laptops, the mood serious. "Mr. Cooper," Evelyn began, "what we found today changes everything. This isn't just a significant discovery, it's potentially one of the most important art recoveries of the century. Many of these pieces have been missing for decades, museums have been searching for them, families have been mourning their loss, governments have wanted them back." "That's good, right?" Daniel asked. "That means we can return them?" "It means it's complicated," Evelyn said. "Some pieces were legitimately purchased and belong to you legally. Others were definitely stolen and will need to be returned. Many fall into a gray area where ownership will be disputed. And Daniel, once word of this gets out, and it will get out, your life is going to change dramatically." "How soon will word get out?" Daniel asked. "We've been extremely careful," Evelyn said. "My team is completely trustworthy. But we'll need to contact authorities soon, probably within a week. The FBI's art crime team needs to be involved. Interpol will want to review the collection. Museums will make claims. It's not a matter of if the secret gets out, but when. What do I do until then?" Evelyn exchanged glances with Raymond. "You be careful," Raymond said, speaking for the first time that evening. "Collections like this, they attract attention from dangerous people. Thieves who'd love to steal a few pieces, collectors who operate outside the law, even legitimate dealers who might use questionable tactics to gain access. Until this is properly secured and publicized, you and your son are vulnerable." Daniel's blood ran cold. "How vulnerable?" Raymond didn't sugarcoat it. "There are people who've killed for a single masterpiece. You've got 70 crates of them in a remote location. If word leaked to the wrong circles before proper security was established, it could get bad fast." "I have a son," Daniel said, his voice rising. "An 8-year-old who doesn't understand any of this." "I know," Evelyn said gently. "That's why we need to move quickly but carefully. We'll establish security on the island immediately. Raymond will coordinate. We'll contact authorities and begin the authentication process officially. And we'll make sure you and Marcus are protected." "How?" Daniel asked. "Raymond can arrange security for your home," Evelyn said. "It might seem excessive, but better safe than sorry." Daniel thought about their cramped apartment, the neighbor who played loud music, the thin walls. The idea of having security there seemed absurd, but the idea of someone threatening Marcus was worse. "Okay," Daniel said, "whatever you think is necessary." Over the next 3 days, things moved fast. Raymond installed an alarm system at Daniel's apartment and arranged for daily check-ins. Evelyn began the delicate process of contacting the FBI's art crime team. Patricia returned to the island with additional equipment to begin detailed analysis. And Daniel tried to maintain some semblance of normal life, taking Marcus to school, going to work, pretending everything was fine. But on the 4th day, everything fell apart. Daniel was mopping the hospital corridor at 2 a.m. when his phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn, "Call me immediately, emergency." His hands shook as he dialed. "What happened?" "Word leaked," Evelyn said, her voice tight. "I don't know how. Someone in one of the agencies we contacted must have talked. There's a story breaking online right now. Main man discovers $400 million art collection on island purchased for $1. Daniel felt the world tilt. No, we were being careful." "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm so sorry. But it's out there now and spreading fast. Major news outlets are picking it up. By morning, this will be everywhere." "What do I do?" Daniel asked, panic rising. "Go home," Evelyn said. "Don't talk to any reporters. Don't confirm or deny anything. Raymond is on his way to you now. We're going to get ahead of this, but Daniel, you need to prepare yourself. Your life is about to become very public very quickly." Daniel left work without finishing his shift, drove home in a daze, and found Raymond already waiting outside his building. "There are reporters," Raymond said grimly. "They found your address somehow. They're setting up across the street." Daniel looked. 3 news vans were parked under streetlights, cameras and reporters visible inside. His stomach dropped. "I need to get Marcus." "He's with your mother-in-law?" Raymond asked. Daniel nodded. "Then let's go get him now before they connect those dots too." They drove to Linda's house in silence. Daniel's phone was exploding with notifications. Text messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Missed calls from unknown numbers. News alerts flooding his screen. Linda answered the door in her bathrobe, eyes wide. "Daniel, what's happening? I've been seeing news reports about an island and art and your name, and I thought it was a mistake, but then more reports, and I didn't know what to believe." "It's complicated," Daniel said. "I need to take Marcus somewhere safe." "Safe from what?" Linda's voice rose. "Daniel, what have you gotten into?" "I didn't get into anything," Daniel said, frustration and fear making his voice sharp. "I found something valuable, and now everyone knows." Linda stared at him. "How valuable?" $400 million, Daniel said. The number felt absurd saying it out loud. Linda sat down hard. "Sweet Jesus. Is Marcus in danger?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But I'm not taking chances." Linda got Marcus, who was half asleep and confused. "Dad? What's wrong?" "We're going somewhere for a few days, buddy," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm. "Kind of an adventure." Marcus, still groggy, accepted this without question. They drove to a cabin Raymond had secured, 2 hours north, remote and unmarked. "It's owned by a colleague," Raymond explained. "No paper trail connecting it to you. You'll be safe here while we figure this out." The cabin was small but comfortable. Daniel got Marcus settled in bed, lying to him that everything was fine, just a precaution, nothing to worry about. But Daniel was terrified. His phone continued buzzing. He finally looked at the headlines. "Custodian strikes gold. The $1 island with $400 million in hidden art. Widowed father's desperate auction. Bid leads to discovery of the century. Missing masterpieces found in main cave. Biggest art find in 50 years. The stories had details. His full name, his job, Sarah's death, Marcus's age. Everything felt invaded, exposed. Around 3 a.m., a new email arrived. Daniel almost deleted it as spam, but the subject line stopped him. Regarding Theodore Millbrook estate claim, he opened it. "Mr. Cooper, my name is Harold Millbrook. Theodore Millbrook was my first cousin. We were not close, but blood is blood. I have been made aware of your discovery of property on an island previously owned by Theodore. As his closest living relative, I am filing legal claim to the estate, including all contents found therein. I expect you will cooperate with the proper transfer of these assets to their rightful family ownership. You will be hearing from my attorney, Harold Millbrook." Daniel's stomach churned. He forwarded the email to Evelyn, who responded within minutes. "Expected. Theodore's distant relatives are going to come out of the woodwork now. Don't respond. Let legal counsel handle it." But it wasn't just Harold. Over the next 2 days, 3 more distant Millbrook relatives emerged, all claiming Theodore had spoken to them about his collection, all insisting they had rights to it. Then the museum started. A formal letter from a museum in France demanding the return of a Monet reported stolen from their collection in 1972. A claim from an Italian institution regarding the Caravaggio. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, famous for its unsolved heist, requesting information about several pieces that matched their stolen inventory. Each claim came with lawyers, documentation, and veiled threats about what would happen if Daniel didn't cooperate. Then the collectors started calling. Daniel's phone number had somehow leaked, and now strangers called at all hours. "Mr. Cooper, I represent a private collector who would like to make a discreet purchase offer for several pieces before they enter legal limbo." "Daniel, this is Marcus Webb from Webb Acquisitions. We specialize in facilitating sales of complicated provenance. We can make this very lucrative for you, no questions asked." Some were more threatening. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," one caller said. "Be smart. Work with people who know how to handle these situations, or things could get difficult for you and your boy. Daniel reported the threatening calls to Raymond, who reported them to the FBI. But they kept coming. Anonymous emails, letters delivered to the cabin somehow, photos of Daniel and Marcus that had clearly been taken without their knowledge. "You're being followed," Raymond confirmed after checking security footage. "At least 2 different vehicles we've identified. Professional surveillance." "Who?" Daniel demanded. "Could be collectors trying to assess the situation," Raymond said. "Could be journalists. Could be thieves scoping out vulnerabilities. We don't know yet." "This is insane," Daniel said. "I bought an island for $1. I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Raymond said quietly. "But you're in it now. And we need to keep you and Marcus safe until the legal situation resolves." The legal situation only got worse. Harold Millbrook filed a formal lawsuit claiming Daniel had no right to Theodore's collection as it should have passed to family. A Swiss art dealer named Klaus Reinhardt filed a competing claim, saying 3 paintings had been sold to Theodore under false pretenses and belonged to Reinhardt's clients. The French Museum obtained a court order freezing any potential sale of the Monet pending resolution of their ownership claim, and a group calling itself the Cultural Heritage Protection Alliance filed a motion arguing that the entire collection should be seized as stolen property and distributed back to various institutions. Daniel received a notice that he was being sued by no fewer than 7 different parties. The legal fees alone would be devastating if he tried to fight. That's when Evelyn called with unexpected news. "There's an attorney who wants to meet with you," she said. "His name is Thomas Chen. He's based in New York, specializes in cultural property law. He's handled some of the biggest restitution cases in the world." "Why does he want to meet me?" Daniel asked. "Because he thinks what you're trying to do, returning the art, doing the right thing, is worth fighting for," Evelyn said. "And he's offering to represent you pro bono." Daniel nearly dropped the phone. "Pro bono? Why?" "Because 30 years ago, Thomas's family lost a Klimt painting to the Nazis," Evelyn explained. "They spent decades trying to recover it, but couldn't afford the legal fight. The painting is still missing. He became a lawyer specifically to help people navigate these situations. And when he heard your story, he reached out. Said if you're willing to work with authorities and do right by the art, he wants to make sure you're protected." Daniel met Thomas Chen 2 days later at the cabin. Thomas was in his early 60s, gray-haired with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd fought hard battles and won most of them. He laid out the situation with brutal honesty. "Mr. Cooper, you're facing multiple competing claims from parties with legitimate grievances," Thomas began. "Museums that had art stolen from them, families whose ancestors were defrauded. Even some of Theodore's relatives have marginal claims, though they're mostly opportunistic. The legal tangle here could take years to resolve." "Years I don't have," Daniel said. "I'm broke. I can barely afford rent." "I know," Thomas said. "That's why we're going to be strategic. Some of these pieces have absolutely no ownership disputes. They were purchased legitimately, and Theodore had clear title. Those are unquestionably yours. That's maybe 15 to 20 pieces worth, conservatively, $50 to $70 million. Daniel's head spun. "That much is mine?" "If we handle this correctly, yes," Thomas said. "The rest, we negotiate. Museums get back what was stolen from them. Families get restitution where appropriate. But you, as the finder, are entitled to significant compensation even for the pieces you return. Finder's fees, rewards, good faith settlements. If we play this right, you could walk away with $75 to $100 million after taxes and legal fees. And more importantly, you'd be legally protected. The various lawsuits would be consolidated and resolved through mediation. You'd avoid criminal prosecution, and the art would go where it belongs." "What's the catch?" Daniel asked. "The catch is you have to give up fighting for everything," Thomas said. "You take what's clearly yours, Facilitate the return of what isn't, and accept that some parties will walk away unhappy. You won't get 400 million, but you'll get enough to secure your future. Honor your wife's memory and sleep at night knowing you did the right thing. Daniel thought about Sarah, about Marcus, about Theodore dying alone with his secrets. "Okay," he said, "let's do it." Over the next week, Thomas began the complex process of negotiating with multiple parties simultaneously. He filed responses to all the lawsuits, consolidated them into a single mediation proceeding, and began reaching out to museums and institutions with proposals. But while the legal work progressed, the threats escalated. One night the cabin's alarm system triggered. Raymond, who'd been sleeping in his car outside, caught two men attempting to break in through a back window. They ran before he could apprehend them, but they left equipment behind. "Professional grade," Raymond reported grimly, showing Daniel the tools. These weren't amateurs. Someone sent pros. The next day, Daniel received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of Marcus leaving Linda's house taken weeks earlier, scrawled on the back, "Nice kid. Would be a shame if something happened. Make smart choices." Daniel called the FBI immediately. They assigned agents to investigate, but the threats continued. A brick through the cabin window with a note tied to it. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. Give it up before someone gets hurt." An anonymous email with detailed photos of the island, the cave, even the opened crates. "We know where everything is. Security won't stop us. Be reasonable." Raymond increased security, but admitted there were limits to what he could do. "If professionals really want to get to you or the collection, they will," he said. "Our best defense is resolving this legally as fast as possible. Once everything is properly distributed and publicized, you're no longer a target." But the legal process was slow. Museums dragged their feet, wanting to examine every piece personally before committing to agreements. The Millbrook relatives kept filing new motions, delaying proceedings. Klaus Reinhardt refused to negotiate, insisting on full ownership of the disputed pieces, and every delay meant more time for Daniel and Marcus to remain vulnerable. The stress was crushing. Daniel barely slept. He'd lost 20 pounds from anxiety. Marcus, picking up on the tension, became quiet and withdrawn. He stopped asking about the island or the treasure. He just wanted to know when they could go home, when life would be normal again. Then something unexpected happened. The community began to rally. It started small. Daniel's co-worker Pete saw the news and posted on social media defending him. "I've worked with Daniel Cooper for 3 years. He's a good man, a great dad, and he's just trying to do right by his family. Leave him alone." It went viral locally. People Daniel barely knew started speaking up. Linda gave an interview to a local paper talking about how hard Daniel had worked to provide for Marcus after Sarah died. The pastor at Sarah's funeral service wrote an op-ed about Daniel's character. Parents from Marcus's school started a petition supporting them. But not everyone was supportive. Some people were jealous, angry that Daniel had stumbled into a fortune through luck. Comment sections filled with vitriol. "He doesn't deserve that money. He should have to give it all back." Probably trying to steal it for himself. People recognized him at the grocery store and made snide remarks. Someone spray-painted "thief" on the side of his apartment building. A woman confronted him in a parking lot, screaming that he'd stolen from museums and should be in jail. The hostility rattled him, but the support mattered more. Neighbors he'd never spoken to stopped by the cabin to drop off food, to check if he needed anything. Marcus's teacher sent a care package with books and art supplies. Someone set up a GoFundMe to help with his expenses, and it raised $12,000 in 3 days. The outpouring of kindness overwhelmed Daniel. These were people who didn't know him well, who had nothing to gain but who saw someone struggling and wanted to help. It reminded him that most people were good, that community mattered, that he wasn't alone. One afternoon, a man Daniel didn't recognize knocked on the cabin door. Raymond answered cautiously. but the man held up empty hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "I'm Henry Walton. I'm a professor at the University of Maine. I've been following this story and I wanted to offer my support." "What kind of support?" Daniel asked, suspicious of everyone now. "Academic support," Henry said. "I teach art history and cultural heritage law. I've reviewed the public information about your case, and I believe you're being treated unfairly by several parties. I'd like to write an expert analysis defending your legal position and submit it to the mediating court. It might help." "Why would you do that?" Daniel asked. "Because what you're doing matters," Henry said simply. "You could have sold everything on the black market and disappeared. Instead, you're trying to return stolen art to where it belongs. That takes courage, and it deserves support." Daniel invited him in, and over coffee, Henry explained his analysis. "Most finders of treasure attempt to maximize personal gain," he said. "You're doing the opposite, working with authorities, accepting reduced compensation to ensure ethical outcomes. That's rare, and it should be recognized and protected." Henry's expert testimony, submitted later that week, actually made a difference. The mediating judge cited it in a preliminary ruling, noting that Daniel's cooperation and good faith warranted special consideration. It didn't solve everything, but it shifted momentum. Some of the more aggressive claimants backed off. The Millbrook relatives, seeing that their claims were weakening, agreed to a small settlement rather than continue fighting. Klaus Reinhardt, facing public pressure after Henry's analysis went viral, withdrew 2 of his 3 claims. Progress, finally. Thomas used the momentum to push harder in negotiations. He got the French Museum to agree to a finder's fee of $8 million in exchange for the Monet's return. The Italian institution agreed to $6 million for the Caravaggio. The Gardner Museum, grateful to recover several pieces from their famous heist, offered $12 million and public recognition. But the victories came with costs. The stress was eating Daniel alive. He'd developed an ulcer from anxiety. He had nightmares about men breaking into the cabin, about Marcus being kidnapped, about losing everything they'd fought for. He couldn't go back to work. He couldn't let Marcus return to school. Their lives were on hold, suspended in legal limbo, while strangers fought over a fortune hidden in a cave. One night, after putting Marcus to bed, Daniel sat outside the cabin and called Evelyn. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," he admitted. "It's too much. The threats, the lawsuits, the publicity. Maybe I should just give everything back and walk away." "You could," Evelyn said gently. "No one would blame you. But Daniel, you're so close. Another few weeks and most of this will be resolved. The art will be returned. You'll be compensated fairly. And you and Marcus can start rebuilding your lives with actual resources." "But what if something happens before then?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking. "What if these people hurt Marcus?" "That's why we have security," Evelyn said. "That's why we're moving as fast as we can. And Daniel, I promise you what you're doing matters. Those paintings have been hidden for decades. Families have grieved their loss. Museums have mourned them. You're giving them back. That's worth fighting for." Daniel thought about Sarah, about her dream of seeing real art, about how she'd died without ever experiencing that beauty. Now her name would be on plaques in museums beside paintings she'd loved. Children would see art she'd never gotten to see. Her memory would live on in ways that mattered. "You're right," Daniel said quietly. "We keep going." The next day brought another complication. A lawyer representing the Cultural Heritage Protection Alliance filed an emergency motion demanding immediate seizure of all artifacts pending full resolution. They argued that Daniel couldn't be trusted to protect items of such cultural importance, citing the break-in attempts and security concerns. Thomas fought back hard, arguing that Daniel had cooperated fully with authorities, maintained excellent security, and that seizure would be premature and punitive. The judge agreed to hold an emergency hearing. Daniel had to testify. He sat in a courtroom for the first time in his life, sweating in a borrowed suit, answering questions from lawyers who made him feel like a criminal. Mr. Cooper, one attorney asked, can you explain why you didn't immediately contact authorities when you discovered the collection? I didn't know what I'd found, Daniel answered honestly. I thought they were valuable, but I didn't understand the scope until Dr. Hartwell authenticated them. And you took photographs before contacting anyone? Yes, to document what was there. Isn't it true you could have sold items on the black market during that time? I could have, Daniel said, his voice steady. But I didn't, because that would have been wrong. The attorney pressed harder, but Daniel held firm. He explained his decision-making, his consultation with Evelyn, his cooperation with the FBI. He talked about Sarah, about wanting to honor her memory by doing the right thing. And when the attorney finally sat down, Daniel felt wrung out but clean. He'd told the truth. That had to count for something. The judge ruled in Daniel's favor. Mr. Cooper has demonstrated good faith throughout this process, she said. Seizure is unwarranted. However, I am ordering enhanced security measures on the island and requiring weekly progress reports on the mediation. This needs to be resolved. That night, back at the cabin, Daniel allowed himself to believe they might survive this. The legal momentum was shifting. The threats had decreased slightly as security improved, and Thomas was confident they were weeks away from finalizing settlements with most parties. We're going to make it, Daniel told Marcus as he tucked him into bed. I know this has been scary and confusing, but we're almost through it. Will things go back to normal? Marcus asked. Daniel thought about that. Not normal, he admitted. Better than normal. We'll have a real home. You can go to a good school. We'll be safe. And Mom's name will be in museums where people can see the art she loved. Marcus nodded slowly. I think she'd like that. Yeah, buddy, Daniel said, his throat tight. I think she would too. But even as he said it, even as hope began to feel possible again, Daniel knew they weren't safe yet. The threats had decreased, but not disappeared. Legal complications remained, and somewhere out there, dangerous people still wanted what he'd found. The battle wasn't over. It was just entering its final, most crucial phase. And Daniel Cooper, custodian turned accidental guardian of $400 million in stolen art, had to find the strength to see it through. For Marcus, for Sarah, and for the beauty that deserved to be returned to the world. The mediation hearing lasted 3 days. Daniel sat in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits arguing over paintings hidden in a cave 200 miles north. Thomas sat beside him, calm and prepared, while representatives from museums, governments, and competing claimants presented their cases to a federal mediator named Judge Patricia Osworth. The arguments blurred together. Provenance disputes, authentication debates, legal precedents from cases Daniel had never heard of. But through it all, Thomas kept steering back to one central truth. Daniel Cooper had discovered these items legally, reported them appropriately, and cooperated fully with authorities. He deserved protection and fair compensation. On the third day, Judge Osworth called for closing statements. Thomas stood, and for 20 minutes he made the case of his career. He talked about Daniel's character, his loss, his struggle. He talked about Sarah's unfulfilled dreams and how Daniel was trying to honor them. He talked about Theodore Millbrook's dying wish that beauty be preserved. And then he said something that made the room go silent. My client could have sold everything on the black market and disappeared, Thomas said. He could have become a very wealthy man, and no one would have known. Instead, he made the harder choice. He asked for help. He worked with authorities. He agreed to return stolen art even when it cost him millions. That kind of integrity is rare, and if we punish him for it, if we leave him with nothing after he did everything right, what message does that send to the next person who finds something extraordinary? Judge Osworth nodded slowly. Then she asked Daniel to stand. Mr. Cooper, she said, I've reviewed all the evidence, testimony, and expert analyses. I've considered the claims of all parties, and I'm prepared to issue my ruling." Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. First, regarding ownership. The island was purchased legally through a government auction. The previous owner, Theodore Millbrook, left no will and no legitimate heirs with standing. Therefore, Mr. Cooper has legal ownership of the property and its contents, subject to specific claims of stolen property. Relief washed over Daniel, but Judge Osworth wasn't finished. However, she continued, 19 pieces in the collection have been definitively identified as stolen from museums and institutions. These must be returned to their rightful owners. Mr. Cooper will receive finder's fees totaling $38 million for facilitating these returns. Daniel nearly collapsed. $38 million. For returning things that weren't his. Additionally, 23 pieces have clear provenance showing legitimate purchase by Mr. Millbrook. These belong to Mr. Cooper without dispute. Conservative valuation places their worth at $65 million. The remaining items fall into disputed territory. After reviewing all claims, I'm ordering the following distributions. Judge Osworth outlined settlements with various parties. The Millbrook relatives would receive $2 million and one minor painting as acknowledgement of family connection. Klaus Reinhardt would receive one painting he could prove was sold under false pretenses. Several smaller claimants would receive cash settlements totaling $8 million. When she finished, Thomas quickly did the math on his legal pad and showed it to Daniel. After all settlements, legal fees, and taxes, you're looking at approximately $73 million, plus the paintings you own outright. Daniel stared at the number. $73 million. It wasn't the $400 million the full collection was worth, but it was more than he'd ever imagined having, more than enough to change everything. "Is this real?" Daniel whispered. "It's real," Thomas confirmed. "You did it." The room erupted in controlled chaos. Lawyers gathering documents, museum representatives making calls, reporters who'd been waiting outside rushing to file stories. But Daniel just sat there, numb, overwhelmed, trying to process that his life had just fundamentally changed. That night, back at the cabin with Marcus, Daniel tried to explain what had happened. "We won, buddy," he said. "The judge said the island and the art are ours. We get to decide what happens to them." "So we're rich?" Marcus asked. Daniel thought about how to answer. "We're going to be okay," he said carefully. "We'll have enough money to live comfortably, to give you a good education, to help people." "But Marcus, we're not keeping everything. Some of that art was stolen from museums. We're giving it back." "Why?" Marcus asked. "If it's ours, why give it away?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Daniel said. "And because Mom would want us to do the right thing." Marcus thought about this. Then he said, "Can we give some to a museum in Mom's name, so people know she loved art?" Daniel's eyes burned. "Yeah, buddy, that's exactly what we're going to do." Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel worked with Thomas and Evelyn to finalize all the agreements. Museums began arranging to collect their pieces. The Monet would return to France, the Caravaggio to Italy. Several pieces from the Gardner heist would go back to Boston in a ceremony Daniel was invited to attend. But the paintings that were legally his, the 23 pieces Judge Osworth had confirmed belonged to him without dispute, those required harder decisions. He could sell them all, walk away with over $60 million, live like royalty, or he could do something else, something that felt more right. Daniel called a meeting with Thomas, Evelyn, and a financial advisor Evelyn had recommended named Grace Lynn. "I want to create a foundation," Daniel said, "in my wife's name, for art education, the Sarah Cooper Foundation." Grace nodded approvingly. "That's a wonderful idea. What would the foundation's mission be?" Daniel had been thinking about this for days. Sarah died without ever seeing great art in person, he said. She couldn't afford to travel, couldn't afford museum memberships. "I want to change that for other families. I want to fund programs that bring kids from low-income areas to museums. I want to provide art education in underfunded schools. I want to make sure no one else misses out on beauty because they can't afford it." "How much are you thinking of dedicating to this?" Grace asked. Daniel took a deep breath. "I want to donate 15 of the paintings to museums," he said, "with the condition that they're displayed with plaques crediting Sarah. And I want to sell 5 paintings and put that money, maybe $30 million, into an endowment for the foundation." The room went quiet. "That's incredibly generous," Thomas said. "That leaves you with 3 paintings for personal ownership." Daniel nodded. "That's enough. I'll sell 1 more to buy a house and set up Marcus's education fund. The other 2 I'll keep. One was a small landscape Sarah would have loved. The other was a painting of a mother and child that reminded Daniel of her holding Marcus as a baby." "Are you sure about this?" Evelyn asked gently. "You could keep more, sell more, set yourself up for generations." "I'm sure," Daniel said. "This money, it didn't come from me working harder or being smarter. It came from luck and Theodore's obsession and Sarah's dreams. The least I can do is make it mean something." Over the following months, Daniel worked with Grace to establish the Sarah Cooper Foundation properly. They hired an executive director, set up grant programs, partnered with museums across the country. The first initiative was called Sarah's Wish, a program providing all expenses-paid museum trips for students from Title I schools, complete with guided tours, art supplies, and follow-up classroom programs. The response was overwhelming. Within the first year, the foundation would serve over 5,000 students. Teachers sent letters describing children who'd never left their neighborhoods suddenly seeing Van Goghs and Rembrandts in person, their faces transformed by wonder. One letter in particular made Daniel cry. A teacher wrote about a girl from a rough background who'd been failing most subjects. After a foundation-sponsored museum trip, she discovered a passion for art history. Her grades improved, she started drawing. She told her teacher she wanted to be an artist like the ones whose work she'd seen. "Your wife's foundation didn't just show my student some paintings," the teacher wrote. "It showed her a future she didn't know existed." Daniel framed that letter and hung it in his new home. He'd bought a modest house on 3 acres outside Portland, nothing extravagant, just a place with enough room for Marcus to run and enough quiet for them both to heal. The house had a studio space that Daniel converted into an art room, filling it with supplies, easels, and books about famous artists. He'd hoped Marcus might show interest. He didn't expect what actually happened. One afternoon, Daniel came home from a foundation meeting to find Marcus sitting at an easel, completely absorbed in a painting he was working on. It was rough, the perspective off, the colors somewhat garish, but it was also unmistakably a painting of the waterfall on their island. "Buddy," Daniel said softly, not wanting to startle him. "That's beautiful." Marcus turned, paint smeared on his cheek. "I wanted to paint it," he said. "The place where we found everything, so we'd remember. Can I take lessons?" "Art lessons?" Daniel asked. Marcus nodded eagerly. "There's a program at the community center. Mrs. Hartwell told me about it when she visited. She said I should try it." Daniel's throat tightened. "Of course you can take lessons. As many as you want." Marcus beamed and returned to his painting. Daniel stood there watching his son work, seeing Sarah in every brushstroke, every intense concentration of Marcus's face. She would have loved this, he thought. She would have loved watching him discover what she never got to fully explore. Marcus threw himself into art with the same enthusiasm he'd shown for soccer before Sarah died. He took classes twice a week, his room filled with paintings, sketches, experiments in watercolor and acrylic. Some were good, some were terrible. All of them made Daniel's heart swell with pride and ache with loss in equal measure. The art teacher, a kind woman named Rebecca, pulled Daniel aside after a few months. "Your son has real talent," she said. "More than that, he has passion. He talks about his mother constantly, about how she loved art, about how he's painting for her. Daniel wiped his eyes. She would be so proud of him. While Marcus discovered painting, Daniel worked on another project, the island. It couldn't remain just a storage site for memories and empty crates. It needed a purpose. Working with environmental consultants and the state's conservation department, Daniel established the island as a nature preserve. The forests would be protected, the wildlife habitat maintained. But he also funded the construction of a small museum on the site, a weatherproof building designed to blend with the landscape, where visitors could learn about Theodore Millbrook's collection, the discovery, and the journey of returning stolen art. The museum's centerpiece was the cave itself, now safely accessible with installed lighting and walkways. Visitors could see where the crates had been stacked, could read excerpts from Theodore's journals displayed on weatherproof panels, could understand the full scope of what had been hidden and why. One wall of the museum was dedicated to Sarah. Her photograph, enlarged and beautifully framed, showed her smiling, vibrant, alive. Beside it, text explained her love of art, her unfulfilled dreams, and how the foundation in her name was now making sure others didn't miss out on beauty the way she had. Daniel brought Marcus to the island for the museum's opening. It was a small ceremony, just family, Evelyn's team, Thomas, and a few officials. They stood together looking at Sarah's photograph on the wall. "What do you think, buddy?" Daniel asked. "I think Mom's famous now," Marcus said. "People will see her picture and know her name." Daniel knelt beside his son. "She was always worth being famous," he said. "The world just didn't know it yet." They walked through the cave one last time, now empty of crates but full of history. Daniel remembered the day they'd first found it, Marcus excitedly pulling him through the waterfall, the flashlight beams catching that first gold frame. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like yesterday. "Dad," Marcus said as they stood looking at the empty space, "do you think we were supposed to find this?" Daniel considered the question. 2 years ago, he would have said everything was random, that life was just chaos and loss and trying to survive. But standing here now, looking at what they'd built from that $1 bid and a hidden cave, he wasn't so sure. "I think," Daniel said slowly, "that sometimes broken things lead us to beautiful places. Sometimes loss opens doors we didn't know existed. We lost Mom, and it nearly destroyed us. But maybe finding this place, finding these paintings, maybe that was the universe's way of giving us a path forward. A way to honor her and heal and do something good. So yeah, buddy, maybe we were supposed to find this." The months that followed were the most peaceful Daniel had known in years. With financial stability came a kind of breathing room he'd forgotten existed. No more double shifts, no more choosing between groceries and electricity, no more panic attacks about unexpected expenses. He could just be present, be a father, watch Marcus grow and paint and slowly become whole again. But healing wasn't linear. There were still hard days. Days when the grief came back so strong Daniel couldn't get out of bed. Days when Marcus cried for his mother and no amount of comfort helped. Days when the weight of everything, the discovery, the legal battles, the responsibility of honoring Sarah's memory properly, felt too heavy to carry. One of those days came about a year after the legal settlement. Daniel woke up to find Marcus crying at the kitchen table, one of Sarah's old art books open in front of him. "Buddy, what's wrong?" Daniel asked, sitting beside him. "I can't remember her voice," Marcus sobbed. "I try to remember what she sounded like when she read to me, but I can't hear it anymore." Daniel's heart shattered. He pulled Marcus close and they cried together, mourning not just Sarah's death but the slow fading of her presence, the way memory betrayed grief, making the loss feel new all over again. That afternoon, Daniel made a decision. He'd been avoiding it, but it was time. "Come on," he said to Marcus. "We're going somewhere." They drove to the cemetery where Sarah's ashes were buried. Daniel hadn't been back since the funeral. It had been too painful, too final. But now, carrying flowers and a small painting Marcus had made of wild flowers, they walked to her marker. Sarah Elizabeth Cooper, beloved wife and mother, artist at heart. Daniel and Marcus sat on the grass beside the stone. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel began talking, telling Sarah everything. About the island, the cave, the paintings, about the legal battles and the threats and the fear, about the foundation bearing her name and the thousands of children who'd seen art because of her, about Marcus's painting and how good he was getting, about how much they missed her, how sorry he was that she never got to see any of this. "I found a Monet, Sarah," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "A real one, the kind you used to dream about seeing in Paris, and I made sure your name is on the plaque beside it at the museum. Everyone who sees it will know Sarah Cooper loved art, will know you mattered." Marcus opened his sketchbook and showed his mother's grave the paintings he'd been working on. "This one's the ocean," he said, "and this one's the cave where we found everything. And this one's you in the garden like you used to be before you got sick." Daniel looked at the painting. It was rough but recognizable. Sarah kneeling among flowers, sun in her hair, smiling the way she used to. "How did you remember this?" Daniel asked. "From the photos," Marcus said, "and from how I feel when I paint. Like she's helping me. Like she's still here." They sat for hours, talking and crying and laughing and remembering. Daniel told stories about Sarah that Marcus was too young to remember. Marcus shared feelings he'd been holding inside, fears about forgetting her, guilt about being happy sometimes, anger at the unfairness of losing her so young. And slowly, as the afternoon light turned gold, something shifted. The grief didn't disappear, but it changed, became something they could hold rather than something that held them. "We're going to be okay," Daniel finally said, "not because we've forgotten her or moved on, but because we're carrying her with us. Everything we do, the foundation, Marcus's art, helping people, she's part of that." On the drive home, Marcus asked, "Dad, do you think you'll ever stop being sad?" Daniel thought carefully. "I don't think the sadness ever completely goes away," he said, "but I think it gets easier to live with, like a scar that doesn't hurt as much anymore. And buddy, I think Mom would want us to be happy, to live full lives, to paint and laugh and help people and experience beauty. That's how we honor her, not by staying sad forever, but by living the kind of life she dreamed about." Marcus nodded. "Then let's do that. Let's live the kind of life she'd want." "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "Let's do exactly that." 2 years after buying the island, Daniel stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Sarah Cooper Community Arts Center. He'd purchased an old warehouse building in their town and converted it into a space where children could take free art classes, where local artists could display their work, where families could experience creativity regardless of their income. The center offered painting, sculpture, photography, digital art, even classes on art history and museum curation. It was everything Sarah would have loved, made real. Marcus, now 10, stood beside him holding giant scissors. "Ready, buddy?" Daniel asked. "Ready," Marcus said. They cut the ribbon together and the crowd applauded. Inside, the walls were covered with children's artwork. The main gallery featured rotating exhibitions from local artists. The library held thousands of art books. And in the center of the lobby, a large portrait of Sarah smiled down, surrounded by the words, "Beauty belongs to everyone. The Sarah Cooper Foundation." Daniel watched children pour into the building, excited and curious, ready to discover what they could create. He saw parents who looked like he used to look, tired and worried, grateful for something free that their kids could enjoy. He saw Marcus already gravitating toward the painting studio, ready to help younger kids learn what he'd learned. This is it, Daniel thought. This is what the island was for. Not the money, though that helped. Not the fame, which had mostly faded. This, giving people access to beauty and creativity and hope. Creating something that lasted, that mattered, that changed lives. That evening, Evelyn came by Daniel's house for dinner. It had become a tradition, a friendship forged through chaos that had settled into something comfortable and real. She brought wine, he cooked pasta. Marcus showed her his latest paintings. "You've done something remarkable," Evelyn said as they sat on the porch after Marcus went to bed. "The foundation, the community center, the Island Museum. Theodore would be amazed at what his collection became." "Do you think he'd be happy?" Daniel asked. "About us returning everything?" Evelyn considered. "I think he'd be conflicted," she said honestly. "He spent his life accumulating and hiding, but his final journal entry suggested he'd come to regret that. He wanted beauty to be seen, even if he couldn't bring himself to make it happen. You did what he couldn't. You shared it. So yes, I think he'd be happy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies in the yard. Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Grace, the Foundation's financial advisor. The latest grant cycle had been approved. 20 new schools would receive funding. 500 more students would visit museums this year. 200 teachers would get training in arts integration. Sarah's reach was growing, rippling outward in ways Daniel was still discovering. "How are you doing?" Evelyn asked. "Really doing?" Daniel smiled. "Better than I've been in years," he admitted. "Marcus is thriving. The foundation is growing. We're helping people. I wake up excited instead of exhausted. I know Sarah isn't here to see it, and that still hurts, but I think we've built something she'd be proud of. That's all any of us can hope for," Evelyn said. "To build something worth being proud of." Later that night, alone in his studio, Daniel pulled out the 2 paintings he'd kept for himself. The small landscape and the mother with child. He'd refused multiple offers to buy them, some reaching into the millions. They weren't for sale. They were reminders. The landscape reminded him of the island, of that first day when everything was still unknown and possible. The mother and child reminded him of Sarah holding Marcus, of the family they'd been, of love that didn't end just because someone died. He hung both paintings on the wall and stepped back. 2 years ago, he'd been a custodian mopping hospital floors, drowning in debt, barely surviving. He'd bought an island for $1 out of desperate recklessness, not hope. And that stupid, impulsive decision had changed everything. Not because of the money, though that had solved problems he'd thought were unsolvable, but because it had given him purpose, direction, a way to transform loss into something meaningful. The next morning, Marcus asked if they could go back to the island, just to visit. They made the trip on a sunny Saturday, taking the ferry that now ran regularly to what had become a popular destination. Tourists walked the nature trails. Families visited the museum. School groups learned about art recovery and conservation. Daniel and Marcus bypassed the crowds and hiked to the waterfall. The cave was locked now, accessible only during guided tours. But they could still stand at the entrance, look in, remember. "This is where it all started," Marcus said. "Where we found everything." Daniel put his arm around his son's shoulders. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think we didn't find the art. The art found us. I think maybe we were always supposed to be here, supposed to discover it, supposed to give it back to the world. Mom always said everything happens for a reason. Maybe this was the reason. Maybe losing her led us here so we could do this, so her name could live on in a way that helps people." Marcus leaned against his father. "I like that idea." "Me too, buddy," Daniel said. "Me too." They stood together listening to the waterfall, the same sound that had led them to the cave 2 years ago. The same water still flowing, constant and eternal, hiding nothing now, just existing as it always had. Beautiful. As they hiked back to the ferry, Daniel realized something. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt whole, not healed, not unmarked by grief, but whole. Like the broken pieces of his life had been reassembled into something new, something that honored what came before while building toward what came next. On the ferry ride back, Marcus pulled out his sketchbook and started drawing. Daniel watched over his shoulder as the island took shape. The waterfall, the cave entrance, two figures standing together looking out at the ocean. "Who's that?" Daniel asked, pointing to the figures. "That's us," Marcus said. "But look." He pointed to a third figure, sketched lightly in the background, barely visible but definitely there. "And that's Mom, watching over us." Daniel's vision blurred with tears. "That's perfect, buddy. She's always with us." "Always," Marcus agreed. And then he added one more detail. A small signature in the corner of his drawing. Marcus Cooper, inspired by Sarah Cooper, inspired by the island that changed everything. Daniel smiled through his tears. That night, back home, Daniel sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He'd been asked to write an article about the discovery for an art magazine. He'd been avoiding it, unsure what to say, how to capture everything that had happened. But now the words came easily. 2 years ago, I bought an island for $1, he wrote. I thought I was buying a piece of land. What I actually bought was a second chance, a chance to honor my late wife, to give my son a future, to return stolen beauty to the world, and to discover that sometimes the broken places in our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be. The collection we found was worth $400 million, but its real value wasn't in the price tags. It was in the lives changed, the art returned, the children who now see beauty they wouldn't have otherwise experienced. It was in my son discovering his mother's passion and making it his own. It was in learning that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs you, is always worth it. Sarah never got to see the Monet in Paris, but now her name hangs beside one in a museum, and thousands of children visit it every year because of the foundation she inspired. Theodore Millbrook hid his collection for 40 years, dying alone with his secrets. But now those masterpieces are home, displayed for the world to see, no longer locked away but shared as they were always meant to be. I didn't find treasure in that cave. I found purpose, and that, I've learned, is worth more than any price tag could ever capture. Daniel saved the article and closed his laptop. Then he walked to Marcus's room, kissed his sleeping son goodnight, and stood for a moment looking at the paintings covering the walls. Sarah's face appearing in landscapes, in abstract colors, in a dozen different styles as Marcus experimented and grew. She's here, Daniel thought. In every brushstroke, in every child the foundation helps, in every piece of art returned to where it belongs. She's here. And we're okay, more than okay. We're living the life she dreamed about, the life we all deserved. Anyone can survive loss if they're willing to keep walking forward, even when the path ahead looks dark and impossible. As Daniel Cooper closed the door on another quiet evening, Marcus asleep, the foundation thriving, the island transformed from a hiding place into a beacon of hope, he realized something profound. He hadn't bought an island for $1. He'd bought a second chance, and the real treasure wasn't what he'd found in the cave. It was what he'd built with it afterward. Because for Daniel and for everyone whose life was touched by his choice, wealth was never measured in dollars. It was measured in lives saved, art restored, and children who grew up knowing that beauty, hope, and second chances were possible, even after the worst kind of loss. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click now to keep discovering incredible true stories, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes the broken places lead us exactly where we're meant to be.